Amen.
It is a pleasure and a huge privilege for me to welcome a young man who has done so much in a short time. I'm talking about Quentin VerCetty, and it is my, as I said, a privilege to welcome him. In looking at imaginary freedom, something that he had done with one of his mentors, he was described as a social activist, a musician, a performer. He is someone who uses his art to drive social change. He's also an art educator, a community builder, and an award winner, besides being creative. He's the co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts movement, and his works truly display the power of Blacks, their God-given gifts, and he is, I would call Quentin, a light to the community, an example to young people, and for us older folks, somebody who we know will take on the mantle and fight the good fight. So, Quentin, on behalf of the committee and on behalf of everybody else, please know that we do appreciate all that you are doing. I don't have the time to talk about each of the things that you have done. I've tried to summarize it. Please feel free to add anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I might use your introduction as my new bio from now on. But I want to give thanks to Auntie Rita, who invited me to be a part of this and for this wonderful gathering. I'm going to speak a little bit about my work and you know what I consider to be the calling that God has put onto my life, and the mission very much that I've been doing ever since. And yeah, with that, we'll go into some questions and speak a little bit more deeper on this idea of art as resistance. So I like to start off my presentations with little jokes, you know, just to lighten the mood. So I'm assuming that everyone knows what Black Panther is, the movie. And so I'd like to pose this question. What did the Black Panther say when he was asked if he knows who Marcus Garvey was? Feel free to put your answer in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and let me know what you think the answer was. Let's plot that. What do you think? What do you think the Black Panther said when he was asked if he knows who Marcus Garvey was? He said, "What kind of question is that?" And for those who did not get that joke, Wakanda is where the Black Panther is from.
Yeah.
Okay. But you know, it's like a little patois, you know? What kind of question is that? Of course I know who Marcus Garvey is. And so just to reiterate some of the things that was mentioned in my introduction, these are the titles that I personally use. You know, I'm an Afrofuturistic griot, which means I'm a storyteller. I tell stories about the future. I use the term artographer, meaning I'm an artist, researcher, and teacher, practitioner, all in one. And what that means is that art informs how I learn and also informs how I teach others. And in all of the work I do, there's a lot of research that goes into it.
Sorry, Quentin, I was trying to admit somebody and I accidentally hit mute on you. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
It moved.
I thought you were trying to tell me I was talking too much. Another term is a visual imagineer. And what I mean by that is, I believe that God gives me these visions, or the Most High gives me these visions, and then I imagine how the things that I'm being shown actually can function in the future, but also benefit our people today. And then also use the term an interstellar tree. I've been through a lot of interesting circumstances, and I'll speak about them, some of them. You know, and one thing I can say is that no matter what situation I've been put in, I've always been focused on how can I grow. I was always taught on this idea of like, you can't have a testimony without a test. And from the many tests, I can say I have a testament, through the work that I've been doing. And so the testament of my work is that I always focus on how can I grow, right? What is God trying to teach me in this moment in time? And then the next part is ancestral invention. And so that speaks to, honoring where I came from, honoring where my ancestors have been through, and thinking about how can we heal? How can we heal those things, right? And so the avenging is not necessarily the aspect of revenge, right? Because the Bible says revenge is the Lord. So really, it's how can I use this work to heal, right? The avenging is actually helping people to be better than we ever been before, right? I'm here to service, and so my artwork is the extension of my service. And so one of the terms, actually, before I get into this, I was asked to explain this concept of understanding, overstanding, and understanding. And I use that a lot, and I know I don't often break it down, so I want to give you a chance to break that down. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we have a better overstanding and potentially an understanding of Afrofuturism and the work that I do. And so within Caribbean, Jamaican culture, they like to break down words, and they recognize that words have meaning, of course, but also within the ways that words are constructed, there's subtext within those words, there's sub meaning within those words. So when you say that you understand something, the idea is that you're under the influence of that information. So you're under, right? You're under the influence. So you're standing under something. And within Jamaican culture, within Rasta culture, the idea is that we're called to overstand, right? We're called to be given this information and to do something with it. So when you are now taking information or knowledge and you're being able to influence others, now you're overstanding. But then, the next step to that is applying wisdom, right? And wisdom comes only from the Most High. So this is now understanding. This is something spiritual. This is beyond something that you can learn in a book. I often think about how the Bible says, you'll learn from the suckling and babes, right? From the children, right? So a child can have an understanding, a profound awareness and wisdom that precedes their ages. And so for me, oftentimes I feel like when I'm tapping into some of these works and when I'm being inspired to create some of these works, I'm tapping into an understanding, because sometimes I don't even know to the full extent of what the work might mean to people beyond what I put into it, or beyond what I was called to put into it. And so this leads into Afrofuturism. And a lot of people have different understanding and overstanding of Afrofuturism, and I want to give you my definition that was given to me. But before I get into that, I want to share a quick video, which was my introduction to Afrofuturism. Something's happening with the internet. I do apologize if my audio sticks a little bit. I'm in Panama right now. Okay, just to save you all the torture, essentially there's a bunch of different Black people in space in this movie called The Fifth Element. And so it starts off with this Jamaican man kind of filling in this like stereotype of Rastas or Jamaican men with dreads. And, you know, he's smoking in space in the future. But then later on, there's a Black British gentleman speaking about trying to get on a plane. And then there's all these different Black representations in the future. And what really moved me about this scene, even though it's not playing well, it's essentially like there was at least 20 different accents of Black people, you know? And so there was this idea of Blackness not being a monolith and having different representations of Blackness that really had me thinking about what type of community could we have in the future? And thinking about like, hey, what would my family be like in the future? You know, and how can I be a role model in a way or set the groundwork for the future? And so the definition of Afrofuturism that I want to give you is Afrofuturism is a Pan-African frequency that has manifested in the forms of being an arts movement, praxis, and methodology. In terms of art and activism, Afrofuturism is a storytelling practice centering or engaging with African knowledges, legacies, and technologies for healing, expansion, and in some cases, evolution of humanity and living things or relations. Those practices can be precise, hypothetical, science fiction, speculative, fantasy, or prophetic. And so for me, when I tap into Afrofuturism, I feel like, you know, in different parts of my work, I'm tapping into all these things, but it's all about what are the stories we're trying to tell in order to help other people. And so this art piece called Dance for Her Pride was this idea of like, what does it mean to live in a safe community, you know? And I think about my grandmother who's Pentecostal. Sometimes she'll get into the spirit. And this idea of like a safe environment is when, to me, when grandmothers, when aunties, when elderly women of our communities can feel safe to dance like David did in the streets, you know, and dance freely, you know, in the spirit and being able to celebrate as they see fit. And so I took these pictures of these different aunties that I met in different places that I traveled to. One is from Belize. We have one from Haiti. We have another auntie from, this one was from Grenada, and then I have an auntie from the United States. And I was kind of looking at these aunties as the lioness of a community, right? And think about what is the future, what can the future hold for utopia, one may say. And so I took this idea and had them all kind of celebrated, you know, all these different aunties from different communities and different places, and celebrating as if they all existed in one place. And so a lot of elements in my artwork blends times, frames, and cultural eras and blurs dimensions in terms of past, present, and future. It explores common denominators of African and Caribbean cultures. And it's always exploring metaphysics. It's always about some type of spirituality. So anytime you see glowing eyes in my work, it's often about it's about vision, right? Having a vision, but also it's about spirit, right? The spirit of light. And so a lot of the work is exploring these ideas of honoring the ancestors and honoring those who have come before us. And it's also about value, right? For a very long time, you know, Black culture, Caribbean culture, we were told that the ways that we want to express ourselves didn't have value. And so these works are meant to challenge that and to change that narrative. And again, I'm going to be pulling out some Bible texts and quotes, you know. So, you know, one of my favorite ones is, you know, from Psalms, where it says, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, you know. And so, you know, who are we to limit what that joyful noise might sound like? And so, you know, for me, recognizing that there's different cultural expressions, I wanted to show that in this one art piece. And so another key aspect of my work is it's meant to visualize a space for healing or elevation, or to champion people who have helped to facilitate such spaces and places in history. And so I want to take a moment to kind of engage you all. And when you look at this art piece, I'm curious to know, how do you think this might relate to healing? Feel free to let me know in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and let me know. How do you think this art piece could relate to healing?
There's something about the colors, Quentin. The way the colors just seem to be very bright, vibrant. Maybe that could be, though they're very pretty, it could perhaps be the release of trauma, or it could be just a release of energies that we're just holding inside, or it might be interpreted as, now I'm feeling vibrant and bright because I'm now healed. So I feel as though there's two different interpretations from those colors for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Is that Erica? I see your hand.
I would personally think that was the door to the universe, which is vibrant and open for everything to happen.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I see in the chat someone put, heart is open, peaceful facial expression. Yeah. And so this there's an artist named Sun Ra, and Sun Ra often talks about space is the place. And people used to think that he literally meant outer space, like the galaxy, outer space. But that's because people had an understanding of what he was saying, but they didn't have an overstanding of what he was saying. And what he was trying to communicate is that the space is a spiritual space, right? So a spiritual space is a place. And so, you know, as we know it, the galaxy, the universe is endless, right? It's infinite. And so there's infinite amount of space that you can explore spiritually, and how you can actually, you know, elevate oneself and improve oneself, and also the surroundings as well. So this idea of her opening her heart, her opening herself to kind of explore deeper is a part of that. Someone also said, although I cannot see the arms, it seems that the arms are wide open. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so it's actually a play on the Ventura Man, which is ancient Greek Leonardo da Vinci drawing, which is like supposed to be like the perfect portions of a man or of a person. And so in the drawing, you have his arms out and arms down. And so it's kind of a play on that. So a lot of art history that went into it. And so now the flip side to it is, how do people think that this relates to resistance? How can this connect to resistance? Because sometimes we don't often think about healing and resistance coexisting in one place. This is me putting on my art educator hat. Elsa, go ahead. I hope I said the name right. You're still mute. Your mic is mute. Not yet, no. There you go.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. I think resistance stems from power within you, and you could expand that resistance growing into your strength, inner strength, because that's a way you have to be knowledgeable within yourself, and you know what's happening, and you have the strength to sort of not attack it, but to deal with it, because and your piece sounds so much strength in the your arms out like that. And I think resistance means knowing that there's a problem and we could come together and we have strength within each of us that we could do. That's what I think.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you for
it.
sharing that. Erica?
Yeah, hi, it is Erica this time and not Eric Michael. I was thinking a couple of things. The hands are drawn to be wide open, but you also see a pair of hands protecting the inner core. And I think sometimes when we think about resistance, it's us protecting our inner being and our inner core. I see the symbol as being that of a statue, and going back to legacy and looking at our ancestral beings. So when I think of that, it also talks about where we're coming from as individuals and having that resistance that is that comes from our forefathers. But it also shows that because it is an actual statue, it's something that has legacy and something that our children can see. So to me, I see resistance from the future, resistance from the past, but also just connecting that core presence is who we are, and keeping that safe. And I see they're opening up of a door, and I saw it as being something symbolic of maybe even like the 10 Commandments and the rules to live by, and following that tablet, to kind of opening your heart to the universe.
Thank you for sharing that. And I see someone had a great question. They noticed the Canadian flag and the stone arch behind the figure, reminiscent of the arch at the exhibition grounds. Is the statue resisting the arch or maybe reinterpreted? That's a great question. So it is a reinterpretation. And so this is actually for a book cover called The Cosmic Underground North Side. And it's a book that I produced and co-edited. And it's Canada's first book on Afrofuturistic art, and looking at Afrofuturism from a Canadian, Black Canadian lens. And so it was a play on the exhibition place, there's a play on Canada National, the CN exhibition place, and the book being an exhibition place, to see different ways that Black Canadians are expressing Afrofuturism. Black and Afro-Indigenous are looking at Afrofuturism from different standpoints from across Canada. And so so I did replace the angels on top with or the cherubs on top with different iconic Canadian symbolisms, such as the raptors. And I also put a steel pan to represent how Caribbean culture is very important as part of resistance and then part of our culture here in Canada and Black culture in Canada. So I'm glad you picked up on that, and those little antidotes. And yes, the Pan-African flag as well.
Yeah.
And so, and this also connects to my interest that I had in carnival and looking at carnival as a form of resistance as well. And also the use of the leaves, right? The birds of paradise and this idea of the Sankofa bird, right? So oftentimes people might see carnival costumes and see carnival and not realize that this is actually linked to a protest and linked to a lot of ancient African practices around celebrating freedom, right? And this idea of being free like birds. And so one of the things that I was really interested in, if you can see this, can everyone see the 3D sculpture?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was really interested in this idea of how a lot of ancient African cultures use monuments and use statues and use objects to preserve information and to disseminate them, right? And that made me think back to even like Moses and how, why did God of all things, put the Ten Commandments into a tablet, into a stone tablet, right? Because obviously it's durable, right? It wasn't just for style, or it wasn't just because it was convenient. It was really a statement. And so I was looking at like African masks, but also masks, as in masqueraders in carnival, and I wanted to represent and document different Canadian artists who were essentially doing the similar work that I was doing in terms of preserving stories and inspiring the next generation, but through their own different mediums. And so I decided to put it in 3D in a virtual reality space. Thinking about, again, how can I make these things accessible, and how can I preserve these things for a long time? Mainly because I knew that statues cost a lot of money, of course. But in doing that work, I went back to Jamaica as a part of my research. And I was really interested in the different ways that in Jamaica, there are so many monuments that preserved our culture and our history, and actually allowed people to learn about these different acts of resilience and resistance throughout time, right? So, for example, Sam Sharp, and learning about Nanny of the Maroons, et cetera, et cetera. And also the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, who has almost 20 statues on the island of Jamaica alone. So he's him being the first national hero of Jamaica. I was like, wow, this man is really really well represented. But one of the things that his saying that really stuck out to me was, a people without knowledge of their past history, origins, and culture is like a tree without roots. And so after that trip to Jamaica in 2019, I kind of came back to Canada, and I was like, hey, I want to see what statues exist. What objects are out here in Canada? Well, first I started in Toronto. I was like, what exists in Toronto that represents our history? And during that time period, I was only able to find, at the time, 17, and now there's 20 that exist across Canada. And I was like, wow, there's only 20? And I remember a teacher said to me when I was in school, she's like, 20 is a big number. She's like, that's a lot. And I was like, is it? And I was like, well, where my parents are from, where I'm from, in Jamaica, we have 20 statues of one man. And that's not even counting all the rest of the history, And so these are some of the statues that exist in Canada of different Black leaders and different Black figures. And it was actually a very shocking realization that many of them are repeats. So there's at least 4 statues of Toussaint Louverture, who was a Haitian revolutionary, and actually doesn't have anything to do with Canadian history per se. Other than that, Canada, or Quebec specifically, has a large Haitian population. And so I realized there's a lot of Canadian history that was missing, and I realized, like, how can we know our roots here in Canada? And how can we know our connections to the wider world if we're not showing it and preserving it for the next generation? And so here in Ontario, there's currently, there's 10 statues that exist. Out of those 10 statues, half of them were made by Black people. Out of those 5 statues, only 2 of them were made by Canadians who were born here in Canada, so Black Canadians. And those were done by Marianne Chad Carey, and 2 of them were done by myself. And so, again, just to give you context around resistance and resilience and representation, in Queen's Park alone, there are over 30 statues that is dedicated to different colonial figures and different people of history. And so, if you just look at that park alone, there's more representation of oppressive figures in that of history represented in that park than there are of positive representation of Blackness and Caribbean people's contributions to Canada across Canada. And so Dr. Charmaine Nelson refers to this as a form of systemic erasure. Right? She refers to this lack of representation as something that's deliberate. And she also speaks about how this can have a psychological effect on how Black people see themselves, but then also how people see our contribution and our value. And so I realized, public art was a great way to, one, preserve value, share a message, bring community together, and also to combat these ideas of who is worth being represented and who's not. And so my first public art piece was in Belize. And I worked with these young people where I literally asked these young people, hey, what is a positive message you want to share with people 100 years from now? And this little kid just went like this: it's important for people to know that they should show love. It's such a simple message. I'm telling you, profound. God worked through that child. And it's crazy because in San Ignacio, it was a place that was really infected by drugs and gangs. And in my opinion, what better message as an intervention than to remind people, everyone who comes to the township, that they should show love. And so we made this art piece out of steel and concrete. And then when I came back to Toronto, I was thinking about, hey, how can I inspire other young people to show love? And I realized the best way to do that is to let them see themselves as being people of value, right? People of importance. And so I wanted to tell their stories in different speculative and imaginative ways so they can see themselves more than what they thought of themselves before, right? So expanding their imagination, how they saw themselves. So with this young man, I was like, yo, you're important to our future because you think with your heart, so you have that connection. And this young lady who's used to get in a lot of fights, but she also wanted to be a lawyer and a musician. I told her that she should fight with her words and her music instead of with her hands, So the idea of her bared arms is her music. One of my big inspirations also was learning about Matthew DaCosta. I'm not sure how many of you know who Matthew DaCosta is. Feel free to let me know in the chat if you know who he is. If you don't, you're going to learn about him today. Matthew DaCosta is one of the most important Black Canadians as we know it. He was the first documented Black Canadian, free Black person in Canada. He came here in 1605 with Samuel du Champlain and Pierre Douaga, the Sierra de Monts exploration party. And he was a translator for the French. He was hired, he was paid big money to translate for them. So one of the things I speculated and I had a dream about was how could Matthew DaCosta know the language of the Mi'kmaq people and indigenous people? How could he show Samuel du Champlain where to go to find Quebec City if he hasn't been here himself? And so, I thought it was really important for me to represent him as a dignified Black man, as an educated Black man who spoke 12 different languages, because he also worked for the Dutch. He also worked for the Portuguese. And so I realized that it was such a huge disservice that we don't learn about him in Canada. And so this led me to also want to represent other Black leaders and Black people whose stories we don't often hear about, but the impact of what they've done, we all benefit from, right? So like the Blackburns, who helped to create the first taxi cab company in Toronto. The amazing Rita Cox, who created an amazing library program and done so many great things for the community. Kay Blair, who created fantastic and wonderful programs for newly immigrant Caribbean people through micro skills. Stanley Grizzle, who was a porter and helped to create one of the first Black unions for Black people, and also helped to change how unions actually function and actually show up for their workers. And so for me, it was really important to have these works visible, accessible, but also to be able to tell as much stories about not just their lives, but the impact of what they've done. And so this led me into doing more physical sculptures. Again, wanting to allow young people to see and be able to touch these things, and also, again, expand their imagination. Because I realized the biggest resistance to the idea of like someone telling you that you don't have value is for you to see that you have value and to feel that you have value and expand your own ideas of your value. And so this is why, I felt sculptures, and why I was kind of called to do sculptures, because I realized that, young people like to touch things. They like to touch things and like to, ask questions. And I'm like, what's more powerful than to be able to touch something and then see more than what you're feeling, right? And so I also made a sculpture of the wonderful Jean Augustine, who helped to create or helped to establish Black History Month in Canada. And this is actually in her school. And I'm actually working on her full figure statue, which should be, fingers crossed, 2025, 2026. As some people may know, I made the Lincoln M. Alexander statue. And one of the things that was my aim with the statue was not to just tell the story of like the first Black lieutenant governor who's of Jamaican descent, but to tell a story about a man who came from very little and worked his way up, but also a man who went through many transitions and didn't stop. And he became lieutenant governor in his 60s, right? So, I thought that young people, and I even looked to myself to be like, hey, like, I don't need to stop. I don't need to think about my age and how much I can accomplish. And then most recently, I made a video game for young people called Inside Garvey's Yard, or Inside Garvey Yard. And I'm imagining what would a museum dedicated to Marcus Messiah Garvey look like, and what would be in that museum. So I'm going to quickly play this video for you. And the success of this video game actually led to
Revelation 5. You heard the voice said, "Weep now, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah."
No one remember old Marcus Garvey.
Fellow citizens of Africa, I greet you in the name of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World.
And so the idea is that in this video game, you will learn about different facts about Marcus Garvey. You'll answer some questions. And then at the end of it, you'll receive a 3D file where you can download the first ever statue in Canada of Marcus Garvey. And so this is what the 3D file looks like. And I was actually asked by the Jamaican Association of Montreal to actually produce this into a life-size bronze for 2025. And so I want to end my presentation to speak on this idea of the work that I'm doing is really to preserve the histories, to expand the imagination of young folks, and resist against this idea of that we don't have value, that Black people haven't contributed anything to society, but also that we don't have a future. And the work is always speaking to this idea that we do have a future. There's a place for us in the future, but most importantly, we need to cultivate our spiritual gifts in order to be able to accept all that the future has to offer us. And so I end my presentation, of course, as I began it. And so Claudette, why did the Afrofuturist cross the road?
Quentin, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of in a public forum, but I see Eric is trying to redeem me.
Okay,
Thank you
go
so
ahead.
much, Eric Michael.
To get to the other space.
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay, thank you.
But we were gonna have to wait to find out because it's in the future.
We got to wait to find out. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin. That was just breathtaking. And I think it's now time for a lot of very eager participants to ask you questions, either by putting up their hand in as part of the reaction button or typing a question into the chat. So it's your opportunity now, everybody, to engage with Quentin. I have a quick question. Well, it's not a quick question. Do you have any thoughts for Anglicans, Black or not Black Anglicans, about your quest that you mentioned at the end? Are churches able to be part of that, or are we so involved in colonialism and enslavement that we can't get there from here? What do you think?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think absolutely yes. You know, there's room for everyone to contribute to make better on on the past and to improve. Right, healing is not an individual, but it's a collective effort. And so I think the church has a huge role. I think the church has a huge role in terms of how they can position themselves, how they can support. And also historically, they have always played a big role. When you think about abolitionist work, when you think about, so many different things, right, in terms of helping to improve society in different ways. And I think for me personally, because of the role I believe spirituality takes in terms of improving the future, I think that's also a place and space where the church can also support. Because oftentimes people get caught up in semantics, and I think a more emphasis on what God wants us to do is important.
I'll shut up now. Thank you so much. Who's up next?
Eric Michael has his hands up.
Go ahead.
I have a question. So,
When you were Quentin.
Quentin, when you were my age, how did you nurture your creativity as a child?
Wow, that's a good question.
Yep.
So my creativity came out of trying to prevent myself from getting lost in the things that were happening around me. I didn't grow up in a very good neighborhood, and I didn't grow up around a lot of positive or good people. And a lot of bad things happened to people around me, and some bad things happened to me. And so I was using art as a way to imagine a better world for myself and for the people who I love and people who I care about. I lost a lot of friends when I was very young. And so I would use art as a way to remember them and as a way to believe that I had a purpose. And so that's the different ways that I cultivated my art when I was younger. And then as I got older, I realized that my art was able to help other people. And so I started to cultivate my artwork to help other people as I was helping myself.
I have
Thank you for the question.
I have another question. Did anyone tell you to stop dreaming and to do something real?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say no, and the reason why it's no is because I had a moment in my life where I wasn't doing a lot of good things. And so when I got to wanting to do art, it was a huge relief. People were like, wow, this is much better than what you were doing before. So I think I was able to get support in that way. But also by the time I was ready to do art and show people that I wanted to be an artist, I think I was pretty good at that point. So people were surprised in a lot of ways, and I got a lot of support. Like a lot of the guys who I used to hang out with who were not doing good things, they wanted me to keep doing art and not get caught up in what they were doing because they thought I was so good. And so I don't think anyone ever told me to stop making art, but I know people told me to stop dreaming about doing other things that was not art related.
That's Quentin. He went downstairs. He wants to show you one of his art pieces. So thank you.
I think you have a friend for life, Quentin.
I'll let him.
By the way, I also drew this. Painted this.
Oh, wow.
It's only cute.
Wow.
That's lovely.
That is lovely. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Wow.
I'd love to see it in person one day.
I drew when I was 7.
Wow.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Claudette has her hand up. Are we ready for Claudette?
Thanks. My question is, like, I noticed you spoke about your neighborhood and so forth. And you referred to instances where you didn't quite do the right things. And as you were saying that, I thought, okay, who mentored you? Tell us a little bit about somebody who mentored you. Tell us, I believe that you met the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. Would you tell us about those meetings and those mentorships? And what would you say to us, Black people and the Black kids who are experiencing difficulties, whatever they are?
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, I think we would need a whole nother hour for that one. Okay, I'll start with mentorship. I was very fortunate to have mentorship in all different shapes and forms. I would say one of my biggest mentors actually was a teacher who went to a church similar to my parents. My parents are Seventh-day Adventists, and he was also Seventh-day Adventist. And so he knew my parents. And so he would be quick to call me out and be like, listen, I'm going to tell sister so-and-so that you're out here with your pants down to your... But we were able to, because I dropped out of high school. Okay, so let me go back. When I met Lincoln Alexander, I was on the verge of leaving high school. I was not making good decisions. I thought school was not for me. And Lincoln M. Alexander, I was in the school called Lincoln M. Alexander, and he walked into the school, and I had no clue who he was. And I was hanging out in the hallway, skipping class, and he just walked up to me and said, young man, I can see you doing great things, and I hope you come to my assembly today. And I thought, because of the way he was dressed, because he's dressed so official, and just the way he carried himself, I thought he was a police officer. And so I was like, I'm definitely not going to the assembly today because I don't want to get arrested. And, you know, I don't want my friends to think I'm being associated with police, all these different things. And as things have it, you know, I ended up leaving the school, and I was out of school for about 4 years. And I ended up getting back into school because my best friend, Rory, he told me, yo, just get your high school diploma. He's like, there's anything you do in life, just get your high school diploma. Because at that time, I was actually thinking about becoming a tattoo artist. And so I set out to go to the school, and there's a very small school called Nelson A. Boarding. It doesn't exist anymore. But at that school, there was a teacher who knew both me and Rory's parents, because both of our parents were Seventh-day Adventists. And so he would pick on us. And he'd be like, listen, I'm going to call Sister so-and-so if I see you out here in the hallways, like, you know. And so we developed a friendship. But what was most important to me was he wasn't stuck on my potential, right? He wasn't stuck on what I could be. He was really focused on who I was in that moment and was speaking to me in that moment and trying to help me to understand that I could be more than my circumstances. And so he really encouraged me to explore my artwork, write poetry, and share it with people, you know, and it just came out of a lot of great conversations. He prayed with me, and so it was really powerful to have someone who cared about me in the ways that he did, you know, and saw me as a young tree, right? And he poured water into me, you know, in different ways. And yeah, so he was a huge mentor for me. He you know, he would look out for me in terms of sending me opportunities. And one of the biggest defining moments was there was a fight that broke out, and I was about to jump into the fight. Well, I jumped into the fight. I'm not gonna lie, I jumped into the fight, and he pulled me out the fight, and he's like, Quentin, think about everything that you're throwing away. Because at that time I was on the basketball team. I was on the honor roll at that point. I was like on the verge of graduating. And he's like, just think about everything that you just worked so hard for. Think about what you're throwing away right now. I was like, I don't care, man. And he's like, in this moment, you may not care. But he's like, just think about it for a second, what your future will look like. What your future version of yourself care. And so, yeah, having someone to get me thinking about my future also was very important, you know, because as a young man and as a young person, sometimes we don't think beyond the next moment, right? We just react. And so having someone to be able to speak to me in a language that I understood to get me to think about my future was very detrimental. As unfortunate as it was, the person who I ended up getting in a fight with ended up getting killed like 2-3 weeks later. You know, and so and where the shooting happened, it was a place where I often hung out too. So it was like, you know, I often thought about, hey, that could have been me, you know, that could have been both of us, you know. So yeah, so I'll say that, yeah, having a mentor like him, and even having someone like Lincoln M. Alexander, just to be able to speak truth into me before I could see it within myself. You know, because, you know, who would have known? Maybe he did see in the future. Maybe God told him, hey, this young man is going to make a statue of you in a couple of years. So tell him something nice, you know. But yeah, yeah, and I have many other stories of things like that. I see that Sunset Roach is also here in the room. Charles Roach was also a huge mentor to me as well. So from this teacher, his name is Mr. Greg Briquette. he actually brought me to, there's a cafe called Ellington's. There was like a poetry cafe. And that's where I met Charles Roach and Dolly Loss. And these guys were like the coolest people I've ever met. Like I like hanging around older folks because of the stories. And man, these guys had stories upon stories upon stories. And Charles Roach also was a visual artist as well. And so he was just telling me about all the things that, you know, that they used to do and things. And he was giving me so much advice and just hearing from someone who was so highly respected to take the time to like just share with me was so important. So yeah, I've had so many mentors in different ways.
So we've got a few more minutes, Quentin, and there've been a few questions in the chat for a while. I'm going to ask if I can combine Ellen's and Aldrine's. Ellen sees some stuff around kind of the earth and growth and plants in your art, and the future of the earth is implicit in your work. And Aldrine asks about Afrofuturism. Do you see it as prophetic and or redemptive? And if we can have a moment after that, we'll get to Elsa's as well.
Yeah, so I'll answer them quick. So as I mentioned in my definition of Afrofuturism, it's about healing, right? It's about healing for all living things. So the earth is very much alive. You know, there's so many references in the Bible, so many different references in science of how the earth is literally a breathing organism. And so, so yes, there is a definite connection to Afrofuturism on the earth, especially if you're thinking about African people being the original people in the Garden of Eden, right? We were the original caretakers. So, so there is a direct connection between us healing ourselves as people, healing humanity, and then healing the earth. And so in that sense, Afrofuturism is both redemptive and prophetic. I think it depends on how you are going at it and what part of the story you want to tell, or what story you want to tell in terms of Afrofuturism. But I think it's both, right? Being able to speak about Black people in the future is redemptive for your ancestors who were attempted to be wiped out, but it's also prophetic, right? Because, you know, as you know, Africa is a huge continent that's evolving in a way that we can't even explain, right? Like I just came back from Zambia, and like the things that they're doing over there is just mind blowing in terms of technology, innovation. So I definitely can see how Africa is still the cradle of humanity, not just resources wise, not just people wise, but also innovation wise, and in terms of thinking about how can we better coexist on this planet and with the things that were on the planet before us, right? Because again, if you think about creation, you know, God created everything else on the planet before us, right? We came last, and we're here mashing it up, right? So it's important that we think about who came before us, right? The plants, the animals, et cetera, and taking better care of all these relations.
Thank you. And I think we have time for Elsa's question.
Hello. Thank you. It is so much. I love your artwork. And I want to find out. But before that, I want to tell you, I love the way you have the sky always and the air out here. It tells me of like positive, you know, we don't know the whole world beyond us. And it speaks for my spirit and everybody's spirit. But the question I'm asking you is, did you go to the to hear Zach Ove and his statue? It was lovely, yeah? And have you connected with him? And how many people like you and him? How many of them are, you know? Do you have I think you're one of a time, you know, a unique kind of a thing. I don't think a whole lot of people in that same kind of sphere. Do you know anybody, and have you spoken with him? And you seem very, very connected. his work and your work. Very, very commendable.
Yeah, we spoke about connecting many times. Because I also work at the Art Gallery of Ontario, so I was able to meet him on multiple occasions.
But there are not many like you. You don't have a whole community is only like you, or it will have like you in that kind of Afro feel, you know. It seemed to be you're a lonely person at it in that.
I mean, listen, they say where two or more is gathered, God is there, So I think for me, I'm never alone, never lonely.
Okay,
But there's a community of us, though.
okay, thanks.
Well, we
And I
still
hope
have-
to recruit young Eric Michael to be a part of the community.
I think he's there already.
Let's recruit you to be a part of like Joy.
Oh no.
Quentin, I know we're gonna go, but I just wanted to say that, we talk about our Black Canadians who have paved the way for artists like you, and you are living history for us. And just having the opportunity to stay here tonight and hear from you, it really, really is very important. And I think very fitting for our younger generation and our Anglican congregation to hear how art affects who we are as people, as Black members of the congregation, and how we can continue to be supportive, and how we can really use art as a way to reflect our talents from God. And I think before we see you, we see your art, and that is so very important. So thank you for sharing all the way from Panama.
No problem, no problem. I think because Claudia asked me to share about my education. I'm planning to do my PhD. I finished my master's a few years ago. And so I'm planning to put a lot of this practice into theory and write it out into a lengthy book, right? Documentation is important. And so I give thanks for these opportunities to also just to be reminded, of my journey and the call-in and the work that I have done and the work still to be done.
I don't know if you can see, but you have just gotten applause from Alderine, and you've gotten a celebration horn from somebody else. Who was it? It disappeared too fast. So people are very delighted to hear about your PhD and your book. I think we're all agog. We're just astonished and overwhelmed by how wonderful it is to get to know you. Is there time for a quick question? Does anybody have a quick question for Quentin or any comment? All right. What is the name of the Marcus Garvey game? And can we buy it?
Yeah.
For our grandchildren or our
So
children?
it's free online. I'll send the link to Rita Cox and to the organizers. It's free online. It's called Inside Garvey Yard.
All right. Well, thank
you. Play it on your phone, on your computer, on all devices.
All right. Over to Leonard, Father Leonard.
Thank you very much. Am I coming through okay? Do this? Great. Yeah. Well, like Deacon Claudette, I find it difficult to summarize my thoughts. But first of all, Quentin, I've been blown away by your presentation and your purpose, your calling to preserve history, to expand our imagination, and to inspire others. And I must tell you that there is no coincidence with God's timing, because in the church this Sunday, we are celebrating Vocation Sunday. And so it started me thinking of our vocation as Christians. And I certainly admire your dedication, your focus, and your repertoire of cultural expressions. These were all things that I found very, very useful as I listened. And also the fact that you always seek opportunities to grow, to reach out, to lend a hand, and to inspire young people. But I must tell you that there's also something for people like myself, because what I value, again, is the many transitions that you've been through and the many opportunities to learn and to grow. And so on behalf of the group, I want to say thank you very much. I can go on and on, but I particularly want to thank you for the way that you embrace your call, your vocation to experience and to contribute to a better world. And so that's a valuable lesson for me, and I hope for others who listen to your presentation this evening. So thank you very, very much on behalf of all of the organizers. And I also would like to recognize Dr. Rita Cox, who has also been one of my mentors from the time I started worshiping at the Epiphany and St. Mark's in Parkdale. Quentin, thank you very much on behalf of the group.